All right, welcome back to Conscious Construction, the Conscious Enneagram podcast. I'm Abby Robbins.
And I'm Kimberly Culbertson.
And today we're talking about type 2 in
Womp womp!
relationship. Oh, the womp womps. The womp womps. All right, so in our relationship episodes, we're talking about what the types do well in relationship, where they struggle in relationship, how the types can work in relationship, and how we can support the twos in our lives.
Absolutely. I think when you think of the relational types, the two comes to mind first.
Yeah,
They kind of identify around relationships.
Yeah. And, to the same, we said this at the beginning with the 9 episode. Being in a relationship in a 9 is sometimes really good news for you and not always good news for the 9. I think the same thing is true for 2s, yes. Right? Like in a lot of ways, they show up and they really hold so much of their identity in relationship that it can feel really good to be on the receiving end of that, but it doesn't always feel good to be on like the giving end of that.
Right.
And so there's a lot we're going to be able to talk about in type 2s. But let's start with what they do well. I'm really trying to commit to starting with what types do well and not diving directly into their work.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, obviously the type 2, the helper, they are really interested in setting up their people for goodness, So when you are one of the 2's people, you have an advocate in your corner who is really there wanting you to be loved and seen and to achieve your goals. And they are more than willing to kind of try to anticipate and figure out how can I help them to get to where they're trying to go. And so the 2 is really willing to be in service to the relationship. And because they identify so strongly around how they relate, they get a little bump from helping, from helping and from being in your corner, and so that it's like their primary orientation is around they want you to feel loved. So when you're in a relationship with a 2, like the biggest way you can offend a 2 is not feel loved.
What do you mean you don't feel loved?
I'm invested in you feeling loved and valued and appreciated.
Yeah.
And that, of course, is always nice to experience.
Yeah. I think one thing that is a real kind of mark for the 2s in their like strengths column is that they are very willing and committed to show up to the work of a relationship. And that because they are so identified with how they are relational and their relationships really kind of give them a sense of orientation in the world. If there's difficulty or if there's struggle in the relationship, 2s are really willing to show up to that.
Yes.
Now, sometimes they'll want to show up to that in the way they think it should be, and that's not always the case, but 2s are very willing to listen. They're very willing to be open to what someone else has to say about the relationship, about the friendship, the co-working, what have you, whatever the relationship looks like. They're very willing to, because they're in the compliance stance, they're very willing to take in that information and make adjustments to their behavior. And that's really big in relationships. And I don't know, we haven't really talked about this, just like how important it is to show up to the work in relationships.
Yeah.
And not everyone has that same kind of intrinsic motivation that the 2s have. That is like, oh, if something's not working, we better fix it.
Yeah, I was just thinking that if you're in a relationship with a 2 that's going sideways, it is very rare that is because the 2 isn't trying hard or that they don't care. You know, like in certain relationships, like something is not working and the other person is not showing up and not trying to fix it and is like,
whatever.
You like me or you don't. That is not what you get from a 2 when you are in deep relationship with them. If your relationship is not strong, it is almost physically painful for the 2. And they will want to
That's not to say that the 2's not contributing to the issue.
No, not at all.
But it's like their motivation to address the issues and that sort of thing is extremely high. Right. Now, they might not always know what the issue is because we all have our own blind spots, whatever. But it's not, the relationship's not in an issue because of lack of motivation.
Yeah, which means once you can get to the bottom of what actually is wrong and what you actually would like from that person, you have a really good chance of, once communication is good, to like get to a good place.
Yeah.
And that's not universally true.
No,
you know?
No. But you did say like if you can get to good communication, and I think good communication is not something that is necessarily accessible with every single person.
Sure.
Right? Like that requires work on both ends.
Yeah. And I mean, I would actually say it requires work for every type, but in different ways. Yeah. And I think one of the ways for the 2 is that 2s are so good at anticipating needs that it is sometimes hard to listen to what is really needed. Yeah. And then that anticipating needs also, it's a bit of a catch-22 because you're in a relationship with someone who's so good at anticipating your needs, and you might feel like their needs are a mystery. And so it's hard to be reciprocal, you know. So like there's definitely ways that it's hard, but it's never, I just don't care very much. Yeah. You know, so that feeling of
the motivation is always there to like grow and develop the relationship. And that's huge. And it's really foundational to like any relational work, whether it's marriages, friendships, whatever. Like the motivation and the willingness to show up and work is so important. Yeah.
I think even more so than marriages and friendships, in like a counterintuitive way, it's really important in corporate spaces and classroom spaces. Like if you don't have that desire to learn and grow and to develop a person and to really care about the outcome, then the work really goes sideways fast because there's no like you're supposed to care at that level. And 2s, whatever space 2s are in, they have that foundational piece.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. Shifting into like where 2s struggle. Sure. You know, they are really good at anticipating needs. You know, this is kind of what you just said, but like a struggle for them is that they find it really hard to have relationships be reciprocal, right? Because a 2 is repressing their own needs in order to stay, you know, very helpful, very productive. They're trying to earn their place in the relationship by not being a burden, by not having needs, and making themselves indispensable to those that they're in relationship with. So being in a reciprocal relationship with a 2 is very, very challenging because they don't want you to see what they need. They don't want to see what they need.
True, yeah.
They're like, you know, you said if you're in a relationship with a 2, it can seem as though their needs are a mystery. Which is true because it's a mystery to them too. Like it's not like they're trying to hide something from you. Like they don't even know. Yeah. And that can make it really challenging because if you don't know what your needs are, they're definitely not getting met. And if your needs aren't getting met in a relationship, but you're working overtime to meet someone else's needs, you're almost guaranteed to experience a shit ton of resentment. Yes. And that will deteriorate any relationship. Yeah. And so that's a really like sticking point for 2s.
Yeah, and this makes sense when you really get into kind of the key motivations for 2s. 2s have a fear that they are not going to be loved just for who they are. And so they manage that fear by being useful and being of service and being helpful and by giving. And so there's almost, especially when 2s are reactive or when 2s are in a place where they're not very healthy, there's a transactional element of I need to keep a ledger where I'm giving more than I'm receiving. And that way I will know that this person needs me. They want to be loved, but they will settle for being needed. Yeah. And so if you start to try to make that reciprocal, it's actually a bit of a threat. Yeah. Because now you're changing the margin of their ledger and you might not need them eventually. Yeah. And that feels very scary in a subconscious kind of way.
Yeah. Well, and we talked about this in the first season about 3s, and this is kind of the same for all the heart types, right? Is, you know, you're saying that like, oh, they're bringing their ledger up here, but the way the 2 sees it, they're starting from down here, right? So a 2 is not trying, it doesn't consciously know that they're like putting themselves up here in the way that they operate in their relationships. They think that they're starting down here. So they think with all of their doing and helping, whatever, that they're just like tooth and nail clawing up to being even, right? When the reality is they started even. They started enough to be in relationship. And then they've gone above and beyond. right? They've gone above
Yeah.
and beyond, which creates this terrible imbalance in the relationship.
Right. And
But
you
they don't
mentioned-
see it that way.
Yeah. And you mentioned that that is eventually going to lead to resentment, and
Yeah.
it definitely does. I've never worked with a 2 who doesn't feel frustrated that other people can't anticipate for them the way that they anticipate for others.
Yeah.
But it also leads to, aside from the 2 feeling resentment, the person that they are in relationship with can start to feel like they're a bit of a project. Like they're trying to help me so much, it's like they feel like I'm not capable.
Yeah.
Or they feel like I don't know what I need because
Yeah.
they're not even asking, they're just assuming that they know. And sometimes the 2 is anticipating what you need based on their own metrics, but their metrics aren't a match for you.
Yeah.
And so they're doing
doing things that don't
harm.
work.
And yeah.
Yeah, and I mean,
and-
it's not always necessarily harm. Like I think about we've talked about this before. Like Danielle's mom is very likely a 2, and she likes to come over to our house and do projects around the house. But they're not projects that like we have on any to-do list. They're projects that like she's made up. Like she has her own projects for our home and all, right? Like, and so it can feel really. It's interesting to like feel the interaction because she's coming over trying to help, and we're like, this isn't helpful.
And it might feel judgmental.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to help clean your
whatever. The front
fence
yard
or something. Yeah.
Like, and it's like, well, that's not important to us. That's not what we value. That's not where we could actually use your help. But she's determined to help in that way. And so even trying to share ways that we could use her help, because I mean, we're 2 self-employed people that have 2 kids, like, and a whole bunch of pets. Like, it's not that we don't need help in our life.
Yeah.
Like, that's not what we're saying at all. It's not like we have some like magic handle on this.
Yeah.
But there are specific things that like we value and we would rather have time and energy spent on, that funnily enough she doesn't have a lot of interest in helping with. Right, but she wants to help in the way that she helps, and it often causes more. It causes more drama because she's already coming in with a sense of resentment, even though it was her idea, right? And like we're coming in with resistance because it wasn't our idea, and then and then it's this whole cycle, right? And this is like a very, this is a very like stereotypical kind of, reaction and situation with 2s, because like you said, trying to bring the relationship into reciprocity can be threatening for 2s. At one point Danielle said, no, you're not going to come over and do housework, but we'd love to have lunch. Right? And like that was clearly very disorienting for her. And there's a whole bunch of other things playing into it, like she's older, she grew up on a farm, like there's a way in which service is a real gift, and it can cause tension.
Right.
So I think work for 2s can also look like listening. We talked a little bit about this in the 1s. There is something about the compliance stance. They want to comply to what other people are thinking, feeling, doing, etc., but not really. Right? They're like complying to what they think other people think, feel, or are doing, right? And so there's a way in which real listening is actually more challenging than you would expect.
Yes, I think part of it is that there's a pride in the anticipation. Like, I want to just know what my people want and need. And if they have to ask, they've already failed the mission. And so when you ask to like make the space and say like, what would be the most helpful to you? It's like you're giving up almost,
That is so real, because there is a piece of like pride in the 2s that like, I am anticipating this. I have like, I'm already 3 steps ahead. And it can feel kind of defeating, and 2s don't get the same like bump, the same kind of like hit of the juice if they have to ask. But that's really where so much of the work is in the acting and in the listening.
Yeah, and also when you do the anticipating and you offer the thing, or you even just do the thing without asking for it, and you don't get relational improvement and appreciation, then it is because they've conflated, I'm doing this for this person and they're going to love me. And then they go like, actually don't want that. It is a bomb. Whereas normally it's just a miscommunication or it's just, like it's a transactional thing. So the other person is experiencing it as a transaction. Like, I appreciate that you want to clean my house, but I actually don't want that. I really just want to hang out with you. Like from your viewpoint, you're saying you're important to me. Even if you don't clean my house, I want to take you to lunch. But from their point of view, it can feel like I made this offer and it's been rejected. And it's because they don't love me and they don't want me in their life. And they like go down this spiral that you never intended.
Yeah.
It's hard. I think it's hard being a 2.
Yeah. Well, and I share this all the time when I'm teaching about 2s, because I think if you're not a 2 and you're in relationship with a 2 and it's challenging, it can feel like you get to feel extra like the monster, right? Because they're being so nice and so sweet. Yeah. But then it's just as confusing because you don't get why they're being resentful or angry or what have you. But I always share, a big thing about the Enneagram and why it's powerful for people just on a super basic level is that most people don't realize that not everyone sees the world the way they do.
That is so true.
And so if we just like start from that premise.
Like imagine if you're this way.
Yeah, and imagine if you're a 2 and you can see and anticipate every single person's needs and you just feel naturally inclined and motivated to meet those needs, right? But then, and you assume that everyone else is seeing the world the same way you do and operates the same way you do and thinks and feels and acts the same way you do, but nobody is stepping in to anticipate your needs.
Then you would have to interpret that as they don't love you.
Yeah, that like everyone else is an asshole.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and you could take it from they don't love me to I am unlovable.
Yeah.
Right? So it goes from like, why is nobody meeting my needs to, oh, they must not love me. Everyone's doing it. So clearly I am unlovable. Right? Like it's so quick.
I hate it.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's helpful to remember that if you're with 2s, we've talked about like where 2s struggle. I think the work for 2s, we've talked a little bit about like what, listening, asking, slowing down, not relying on the anticipation. But working for 2s, right? Like if you're going to help 2s, we're jumping all around. We're getting the little containers mixed up. We just poured them all out on the table. But if you want to be in relationship with a 2, right, like really holding that, like they are doing this out of a sense of love, but also out of a sense of shame. Yeah. And
they're in that heart center. They are wrestling shame.
And being really sensitive to that.
Yeah. And even just, are we moving into how we can support them?
Well, let's double back to what the work is for the 2s so that we have a little bit. It's like when I was a kid, I always loved when my mom let me like pour all the Legos that I had out on the floor. And I had like one of those big Rubbermaid containers of Legos. Dude. So it was a lot of Legos. Like, Mom, can I pour my Legos out? And she'd be like, yeah, and I pour them all out. That is what's happened with this episode. We've poured all the Legos out. So now we're going to try and sort them back out.
I just feel worried about their feet now with that metaphor. Like they're all like, ow, geez, listening to this.
Yeah, okay, sorry. That's why we're gonna redo them. Okay, we're gonna put them back in their right piles. We talked about what 2s do well. We talked about what 2s struggle with. Let's talk about the work for type 2s. Okay. I gave just kind of a quick rundown, slowing down, don't anticipate, like ask questions, listen. Yeah. What else? Let's dive a little bit deeper into this work for 2s.
Honestly, I think the work for 2s is to receive. To really find the people with whom they feel safe and loved and allow those people to care for you. But with the understanding that, especially if you're not in a relationship with another 2, they do not see the world in the same lens that you see it through. And so they can't necessarily anticipate your needs the way you might hope that they would.
And here's an add-on to that, because in a lot of the same ways that ones think that they're doing the things right, and we talked about like, you're not right about what you're wrong about.
Right.
The twos have this assumption that they're anticipating these needs flawlessly, and that is not the case.
For sure.
And so there is a piece of like humility in admitting that like I'm doing all this work, and people might be very receptive, very appreciative, but you're not healing them. You're not solving their life crises, right? You're being helpful, right? But you are not saving them. And I think what twos really want is to be saved, right? Saved from their own neediness, saved from their own sense of shame and sadness. And no one can do that for you. So people could come in and actually be incredibly helpful. But if your expectation is that you have, like someone comes in and solves your life crises and fixes your self-esteem and makes you feel worthy and lovable, you're always going to feel slighted and shorted. That's not what we do for each other. Like that work is your work internally, not something that anyone can come in and just help you through.
Yeah. And you can't really do that for other people either.
Yeah, it's like you're not doing that for other people, even though you might think you are.
And it might be painful when you realize that you're not. Or, as is the case often with, twos tend to fall into codependency more easily than the other types.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean every two is codependent, but
it's a higher likelihood.
It's a high correlation.
Yeah.
And in codependency, one of the real pieces of work, as someone who is codependent and grew up in codependency, you have to realize where the way that you're helping is not actually helpful.
It's hurting.
And and that realization is a painful one.
Yeah.
So like if you keep rescuing someone who keeps running up a debt in gambling in casinos or something, it's not actually helping them get better.
It's enabling their disease.
So much of codependency is enabling an irresponsible pattern, whether it's addiction or not addiction. And you might be rescuing in the moment, but you're prolonging the cycle and the suffering. And so sometimes the two has to do the work of stepping out into a broader picture.
Yeah.
And to realize that reciprocity is the healthiest way to do relationship, which means that they have to be vulnerable in a way that they're not comfortable.
Yeah.
But we want interdependence, we don't want codependence, and we don't want to keep enabling negative things. And so sometimes the work is to understand the difference between, throwing out a life raft to someone who's drowning, which of course you want to do, versus
jumping in there with them.
Jumping in case they drown, or whatever the case. I don't know, that metaphor probably breaks down, but it's work of recalibrating what kind of help you are offering and why you're offering it.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of work for twos, especially around this codependency piece, around like, in order, if your goal is reciprocity in relationships, twos are likely going to have a lot of relationships that they end because people on the other side are not going to be capable of reciprocity.
And they didn't know that because they never expected it.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
And so they didn't even know that they were getting slighted because they were just showing up and doing all this. And so I think that that's a big piece of work for twos, is really like learning how to end a relationship.
I feel like somewhere just threw something at the screen.
Yeah. Like the twos have like, every two has just like tuned out.
And goodbye.
They're like, fuck this noise. I'm out. Audi 5000, never down thumb.
But it is true. Not everybody deserves the kind of love and care that twos offer.
Yeah. And
they're afraid to ask that question about, like, is this a relationship where this person deserves this from me?
And people who aren't twos don't realize how difficult this is for twos.
Yeah.
But we go back to the beginning of the episode. Twos are identified, right? Meaning they draw a piece of their foundational psychological structure from the fact that they are good at relationship, that they are in relationship with people. And if a relationship ends,
And they feel like
it's essentially, it's an existential crisis for a 2.
It for sure is.
Like 100%. And so I think there's a lot of work for 2 in relationships. And I think there's a lot of work that 2s have to do out of relationship.
Yeah, I think even if you pull another layer back, if you take this element of transactional worth out of the equation, you have to then source your feeling that you are lovable from outside of that relationship. So you have to do the work.
And that's the spicy one.
Yeah, you have to do the work to love yourself, to know your own self, to become aware of your own needs, to be able to express those needs in appropriate ways, so that you can be in relationship without needing to keep that ledger.
Yeah.
And be able to really trust that you are already lovable. You don't earn your lovability.
Yeah.
And that is, it's hard work for all of us, but it's really
That's
hard
like
work
the
for
core
2s.
of it for 2s.
Yeah. You have to source that identity outside of those relationships.
Yeah. Whew.
Ugh.
Okay, well, how do we support 2s in our lives? Now that we've just handed them their ass and said, good luck, how can we...
Do not. We said we love you. You are lovable.
What the 2s heard was fuck you, the end. Fuck you, period.
Okay.
As we've gone through the circle, right, everybody has just heard, like, why are they telling me to fuck off? Like,
welcome to the Enneagram.
da, 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 da. Again, the Enneagram is not harsh. It's just incredibly accurate.
You just really want the Enneagram to not be harsh. You're making the Enneagram an 8. 8s are not harsh. They're
We're
just
not harsh?
incredibly accurate. Okay.
Oh, Danielle's gonna love that one. On a side note, before we jump into that, there is a quote from a David Daniels book about 8s, and I've never been more red for filth in my entire life. And Danielle was like, we were in a coffee shop in like Arkansas, and she's just like leafing through it, totally like chill morning, whatever. She gets to this one line that David Daniels says about 8s, and it's talking about like their bravado and their kind of like self-assuredness, and they're like, 8s are not often right, but are never in doubt. And I was just like, oh, ouch.
What does red for filth mean?
Just, you just like had your ass handed to you. Like all your shit is out on the table.
Is it like I've never like read a book or read like the color?
No, like read like the color, like somebody
Red
has read
for
you.
filth.
Yeah, like they've read you and told you all your trash. Like all your crap is now like seen and
we're not
experienced.
trying to be harsh with the 2s or any number, but we all have these problematic patterns, and we're doing them to get our needs met in ways that are not allowing our needs to be met.
Yeah.
And with the 2, they're so like hyperbolic in the way that they're serving people that they do not meet their own needs, and then their expectations for people are so high that no one can meet them.
Yeah.
So
how do we support 2s in this space?
I feel like the first thing to say is if you are in a relationship with a 2, stop taking advantage of them.
Ooh, burn.
Because honestly, it's so easy to just like throw out there something you would like, and then it just like appears like a 2 is a genie, because they're so interested.
Ooh.
And it's easy to take advantage of a 2 and then later be like pissy with them when they're trying to offer you something you don't want, and that is mean.
You know what? And I'm going to throw this out from an 8 perspective, and we said we weren't going to do this, but I have to do this. I don't jive with 2s. I often don't jive with 2s. Like, I don't like the vibe.
You're hurting our 2s.
I'm just saying, hey, we're going to get through this together, okay? We are. I don't often jive with 2s because I don't like the often manipulative way that they are trying to give or to help, because it's a direct threat to my where my identity is held, which is in my ability to do, my capability, right? And so their helpfulness often feels like a dig at what is most important to me.
And I think that's true for 5s too.
Yeah, I
5s
agree.
often have a really hard time with 2s because that feeling that they might not be capable of doing something themselves
really can be really threatening.
Yeah.
And so in supporting twos, you're kind of saying don't take advantage, right? Like don't continue to ask for twos help. There is a way in which for some types it's kind of like give the twos a bone.
Yeah.
Let them help you. Right, and that's big
Receive
work.
some help.
Yeah, like that's big work for me as an 8.
Sure.
I need to practice receiving more help. I think all of the relationalists really need to practice receiving help. 8s, 2s, and 5s.
Yeah,
for sure. Like, and I think generally we all have some issues around asking and receiving help, but like the relationalists especially. And so for 8s and 5s, it's kind of like let them help you. Right? Like there's not unless you're just a real megalomaniac, which you probably aren't, 8s aren't going to necessarily take advantage of 2s because it feels too much like a threat to their own like capability.
Do you know any like intimate 2-8 relationships?
I do know several.
Really? Okay.
I don't know them well enough to know their dynamic.
I feel like it would be challenging.
Yeah, but I also feel
sides.
like on some way it could also work in a
they're connected on that line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually know a surprising amount of 5-2 relationships, which is another thing that's like it's challenging and supportive in weird different ways.
But the 5 has some go-along energy that like they just won't fight the 2.
Yeah.
In the way that the 8 would fight the 2.
So anyway, in the same way that we've talked about in several of the other episodes, the key to support is like, don't let them get away with their bullshit, and don't be such a hard ass. Like, let them have some space to be who they are, and challenge them. It's like it's equal parts acceptance and challenge. And so, I'm kind of to the 8s and the 5s. I'm saying I actually need to be more accepting of 2s, and the work for a lot of people is actually to like stop encouraging their their over-reliance on helping and giving in order to be in relationship.
Yeah. I think what I'll add is that because 2s have a default setting to help, they often are kind of the last to know that they are burnt out. So
yeah, that's so true.
By the time the 2 knows, like, I'm over my head or I need something and they, especially if they've already kind of committed to a helpful thing and now they're out of swoons, to give 2s a loving out when they are overextended, I think is really solid relational care to say, like, I know you really wanted to be able to do these 5 things for me, and I appreciate that you want to do them, but I feel like that sounds exhausting to me. Like, can I take one of these things off of your shoulders, or could we extend this deadline, or whatever the case is. Like, I can tell you're overtaxed right now, and it doesn't mean that you don't care. Like, to create like a container for them to say, like, I'm over my head here.
And I will say that that's going to take a lot of relational trust. Like, you're going to have a really solid relationship for a 2 to be able to accept that kind of gesture without immediately feeling as if they're a failure. So I think, in that same kind of give and take, like, you got to let the 2 help you, and then you got to build some relationship there, and then be like, hey, you're doing too much.
Yeah, that's a good word.
That's, of all the types around the circle, 2s may have, at least in my experience, 2s may have the most physical health complications with their types. Like, I have multiple stories in my life of 2s essentially working, like, helping themselves all the way to the hospital.
Yeah.
Like, exhausting themselves to the point that, like, they can no longer function.
Yeah, it's like one part they're working so hard at what they're doing that it's exhausting, but then also they're always doing for others, so they're never making the space to
receive or to have any,
or even just to do the things that would care for themselves, like taking a walk, or eating a healthy meal when it's faster to eat on your way to do something. So there's a lot of discounting the needs that would lead to a healthy balanced life.
Yeah.
Because those things would only be for them, and their metric so devalues something that is only for them, because that isn't helping anyone, that is not earning any relational status. And so they'll get to that eventually, but they never really get to it.
Yeah. I think a big piece, if you're in a relationship with a two, one of the things that can be helpful is to kind of like, you might call this like, a friend of mine calls this like personality judo. Use the energy of their type to like counter the type, right? Like that's what judo's about as a martial art, right? Like you're not like using your own force, you're using the other person's energy against them, right? It's crazy. Anyway.
It's the first time I've ever wanted to do judo.
Right?
I'm like,
I know.
oh, I maybe could do that.
Like, oh, this sounds cool. But essentially like saying to the two and framing it in the sense that like the only way our relationship is going to be good is if you are also good.
Right.
Right? Like if you want our relationship to be good, if that's what you're motivated towards, then you also have to care for yourself, because what I want and what I need is to be in relationship with a whole person.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
And so that is a way that you can kind of help, turn the energy of the type against itself in order to allow the two to create some space for themselves. That like, hey, what I really need in our relationship is for you to be good, for you to be whole, for you to be taken care of, for your needs to also be met. If that's not happening, we can't be in a right relationship. We won't be in a good relationship. And so you've got to take the time to figure that out. And I am here to help you do that. And I'm grateful that you're here to help me do that as well. Yeah. Right? Like kind of setting reciprocity as the goal for the relationship. That is super valuable if you're in relationship with a two.
Yeah. Anytime you can articulate what I want is to see you outside of the way you're serving me, that is going to be a balm.
Yeah.
And they might resist it, but that is going to help them develop that whole personhood, and then when they need something that they don't want to make space for, one little hack that you can do is say like, I would really like it if you did this with me, because all of a sudden it's like, like my body is not feeling good. I really feel like I need something really healthy. Would you go to Mad Greens with me? Like now it's not about their needs.
Let's get sponsored by Mad Greens.
Mad Greens, we love Mad Greens.
Oh my God, I'm gonna like email them.
Let's do it. Yeah. That'd be so funny.
That'd be awesome.
We could Enneagram Mad Greens, like
what
so many
is
options.
The type?
Yeah.
Anyway,
we're not really about that meme life, but we might be if we're sponsored by Mad Greens.
Right. So many people are like, "What the fuck is Mad Greens?"
It's like Chipotle, but for salad.
Yeah.
And it's like you go down the line and you get this really healthy, delicious thing.
Yeah. Anyway, that's what we had for lunch, in case you were wondering why now we're talking about Mad Greens in the middle of our episode.
They have not yet sponsored us. But my point is, like, it's one thing to go like, you are not taking care of yourself, you need to go to the gym. That feels shitty. But
what
going
about
like,
we could go together?
I feel like I need to move my body. I'm feeling really like stuck and anxious. Would you go to the gym with me?
Yeah.
Now, we're kind of hacking it because they want to help me, and now we can both be healthy.
It's like baby steps. It's crutches, right? Like if you've seen The Good Place, it's like sometimes you just get the right behavior, and then the motivation comes along after. That's kind of how it can be sometimes to help the people and support the people that we're in relationship with. And we're talking specifically about twos in this episode, but the same thing happens in all the other types. Whoever you're trying to support, this like strategy is helpful.
Yeah, and there's just a discernment about, am I going to go with their type, or am I going to push against their type? And part of it is, how much trust do I have? Yeah. You can push against more and more the more trust you have.
Yeah.
I think.
And it's like, how much trust do we have in the relationship? Then how much capacity do they have in the moment? Yeah. I think those are two things to keep important. But I feel like we've done a really great job here for twos today. So if you are in a relationship with a two, or if you are a two, I hope that you found this really valuable. Sure, yeah. Drop a comment below, like, comment, share, subscribe, all those things on the YouTube. If you're listening to the audio version, please like us and give a rating in the podcast app of your choice. It really does help to have people find these episodes. We are coming up on the holiday season, so please share this with all of your family members so that you can get prepared with some fun holiday dinner talk. Because what's more interesting than diving into your deepest trauma with all of your family members, right?
Maybe start with this dances one.
Or just go really hard into, whatever. Like, share the podcast with your friends. That's what I'm getting at. It's a huge help. It's a huge help.
Also, we are going into the holidays, and a good gift for your family, especially your family with whom you have good trust, might be to come to our retreat together.
Yeah. So January 20th, we're hosting the Enneagram and Relationships Workshop. Again, it's for all types of relationships. So if you have a spouse or a partner, or you have a friend or a coworker or a family member that you want to bring, we have...
but not that one. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, right? Not that one. No, we have a link down below where you can register. The early bird price ends at December 15th, so be sure to hop on that ASAP. And we have the digital option available as well, so that is also available if you just want to tune in online. You'll have the option to do that, or you can come join us in person in Austin. I know we have a lot of folks in the Austin area and in like Dallas and San Antonio and Houston. Come make a weekend out of it. It's going to be a great time. And we're really excited to see y'all in person and hang out with you. It's going to be some really good stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Please join us.
So thank you so much for listening and for hanging out and for being a part of this community. And we will see y'all in the next one.
Cheers.